May 14, 1944. Fort Hunt, Virginia. Hauptmann Otto Freiherr von Bülow stood motionless on the railway platform, his tall frame rigid with military bearing despite 3 months in Allied captivity. As commander of the German submarine U-404, von Bülow had been decorated with the Knight's Cross for sinking 15 Allied ships before his capture in the North Atlantic. He had been prepared for interrogation, possibly even torture, but nothing in his training had prepared him for what he was witnessing now. Before him stretched an endless procession of flatbed railway cars laden with brand-new M4 Sherman tanks, their olive-drab hulls gleaming in the morning sun. They rolled past at a steady pace, dozens, then scores of identical machines. When the tank carriers finally ended, they were replaced by cars stacked high with aircraft engines, followed by artillery pieces, then more tanks. The American military police flanking von Bülow maintained carefully neutral expressions, instructed neither to explain nor comment on the display unfolding before the prisoner. No explanation was necessary. The message was delivered with industrial clarity. "How long has this been going on?" Von Bülow finally asked, breaking protocol by speaking without permission. "This?" The older MP shrugged with practiced casualness. "This is just the morning shipment from one factory in Detroit. The afternoon train will be by in a few hours." Von Bülow's weathered face remained impassive, but his blue eyes betrayed a flicker of comprehension that the MPs had been trained to recognize. That evening, in the privacy of his Spartan but comfortable quarters at Fort Hunt's classified interrogation center, von Bülow made an entry in the diary he'd been deliberately permitted to keep. "Now I understand," he wrote in precise German script. "We are not fighting a country. We are fighting a continent. What I saw today was not merely military production, it was mathematical certainty. Every tank I watched pass had 20 counterparts in Germany, but for every German 20, I saw 200 American. We are not losing a battle of weapons, but a war of factories." Von Bülow's moment of clarity was neither accidental nor unique. It was a carefully orchestrated component of Operation GOLDCUP, one of the most classified and psychologically sophisticated intelligence operations of World War II. While its existence remained classified until 1973, its impact on the war effort and on the post-war reconstruction of Germany would be profound. The seeds of Operation GOLDCUP were planted in early 1943, as Allied forces began capturing significant numbers of German officers following victories in North Africa and the increasing effectiveness of anti-submarine warfare in the Atlantic. Rather than viewing these prisoners merely as security risks to be contained, several innovative officers within Military Intelligence Division G2 saw an unprecedented opportunity. Major General Clayton Bissell, newly appointed as Assistant Chief of Staff for Intelligence, convened a classified committee in March 1943 at the Pentagon. "Gentlemen," he addressed the assembled intelligence specialists, "we have a unique strategic opportunity. For the first time in military history, we can bring enemy officers into direct contact with our industrial capacity while the war is still being fought. The psychological impact of such exposure could yield intelligence dividends beyond anything conventional interrogation might produce." Dreyfus, the concept behind GOLDCUP, was revolutionary in its psychological insight. Rather than relying solely on traditional interrogation methods, which often yielded only limited tactical information, the operation would strategically expose select German prisoners to America's industrial might, then carefully monitor their reactions and conversations. The objective, Bissell's directive stated, is not merely to extract what the prisoners know, but to fundamentally alter what they believe is possible. Once a German officer has witnessed our production capacity firsthand, his strategic calculations, and his willingness to share intelligence, will be permanently transformed. Colonel Burton C. Andrus, who would later gain fame as the commandant of the Nuremberg prison housing Nazi war criminals, was appointed to oversee the specialized detention facility at Fort Hunt, Virginia, officially designated P.O. Box 1142, to maintain secrecy. Andrus, a World War I veteran with a background in psychology, understood that the traditional interrogation model needed refinement when dealing with highly disciplined German officers. The prisoners we're dealing with have been conditioned to resist direct interrogation, Andrus explained in a recently declassified memorandum. Many can withstand discomfort, threats, even physical coercion. But no human mind can maintain its existing belief structure when confronted with overwhelming contradictory evidence. Show a man enough Sherman tanks rolling off assembly lines, and his understanding of the war's outcome will change more effectively than any interrogation technique could accomplish. The program required unprecedented coordination between military intelligence and civilian manufacturing. Major production facilities across the United States, aircraft plants in California, tank factories in Michigan, shipyards in Virginia, were secretly briefed on their role in what was described as a classified psychological operation essential to the war effort. Henry Ford's massive Willow Run bomber plant outside Detroit became a centerpiece of the operation. Charles E. Sorensen, Ford's production chief, worked directly with military intelligence to create what he called the most effective propaganda ever devised, the simple truth of American production, demonstrated rather than claimed. The initial phase of Gold Cup focused primarily on Luftwaffe and Kriegsmarine officers, who possessed the technical expertise most valuable to Allied intelligence. While the German High Command had some understanding of America's industrial potential, their assessments were largely theoretical, based on pre-war economic data. Few German officers grasped the revolutionary production methods American industry had implemented since Pearl Harbor. By mid-1943, the United States was producing a new aircraft every 5 minutes, a new ship every day, and a new tank every 30 minutes. These figures exceeded even the most pessimistic German intelligence estimates by factors of 3 to 5. More importantly, production was still accelerating, while German manufacturing was increasingly disrupted by strategic bombing. The first formal Gold Cup exposure operation took place on July 7, 1943, when 3 captured Luftwaffe colonels were transported by train from Fort Hunt to the Consolidated Aircraft Factory in San Diego. Their journey was carefully staged to include unplanned stops and delays that exposed them to the scale and intensity of American wartime mobilization. Colonel Werner Schreuer, a decorated fighter ace with 114 aerial victories, recorded his impressions in conversations that were secretly monitored by hidden microphones in the prisoners' quarters. "The Americans have built factories larger than entire German industrial districts," Schreuer told his fellow officers after the San Diego visit. "And not just one such factory. Dozens, perhaps hundreds. I saw more Liberator bombers in a single factory than the total number of fighters my entire group operated on the Eastern Front. The numbers make no sense to me. They defy military logic." This reaction, disbelief followed by reluctant acceptance of a new reality, became a pattern that Gold Cup operatives learned to anticipate and exploit. American intelligence officers were trained to observe the precise moment when a prisoner crossed the threshold from skepticism to comprehension. This moment of revelation typically made prisoners significantly more cooperative with subsequent intelligence-gathering efforts. Korvettenkapitän Herbert Schulze, commander of U-48, and a Knight's Cross recipient responsible for sinking 19 Allied ships, experienced his moment of revelation during a carefully orchestrated train journey that passed by the Philadelphia Naval Yard in October 1943. "It cannot be possible," Schulze whispered to himself, unaware that his American escort was trained to record his comments verbatim. Before him stretched the outlines of more than 60 destroyers and 11 aircraft carriers in various stages of construction. In a single glance, Schulze was seeing more naval tonnage under construction than the entire Kriegsmarine had commissioned since 1935. That evening, Schulze requested a meeting with his interrogation officer and provided detailed information about German acoustic torpedo development, submarine deployment patterns, and communications protocols, intelligence he had successfully withheld through 6 previous formal interrogation sessions. When asked about his change in cooperation, Schulze's response was recorded as, "You already have won. I would rather the knowledge in my head help end this war sooner than extended defeat that is now inevitable. Your country builds more ships in a month than Germany has sunk in a year. Continuing this fight will only create more widows." By early 1944, Gold Cup had expanded beyond transportation and manufacturing exposure. German prisoners were strategically housed in regions showcasing America's agricultural abundance. Luftwaffe pilots who had bombed British cities struggling under strict rationing found themselves looking out over endless fields of grain in Kansas and Nebraska, watching mountains of food being harvested by mechanized equipment operated by civilians, while their own families in Germany faced increasingly severe food shortages. Major General Erwin Meny, captured in Tunisia, observed in a monitored conversation, "Germany entered this war believing resource scarcity could be overcome through territorial conquest. The Americans entered with resources already so abundant they cannot even consume them all. How does one defeat an enemy who has more of everything than they can use?" This psychological insight, that abundance itself could be weaponized as effectively as any tank or aircraft, became a cornerstone of Gold Cup's approach. American intelligence officers were instructed not to restrict prisoners' exposure to American prosperity, but to carefully manage and monitor their reactions to it. A declassified 1944 operational directive from Colonel Andrus instructed handlers, "The objective is not to flaunt American wealth, which could harden resistance, but rather to normalize it, to make clear that our production advantages are structural and permanent, not temporary or exceptional. The prisoner should come to understand that Germany is not merely losing a war, but fighting against insurmountable material odds." The intelligence dividends from Gold Cup extended far beyond the tactical information gleaned from individual prisoners. As German officers' perceptions shifted, they provided unprecedented insights into Germany's strategic vulnerabilities, technological limitations, and increasingly desperate wartime innovations. Luftwaffe Colonel Adolf Galland, inspector of fighters for the German Air Force, had maintained rigid discipline during conventional interrogations following his capture in January 1944. After a carefully orchestrated tour of the Republic Aviation P-47 Thunderbolt factory in Farmingdale, New York, where he witnessed a complete fighter aircraft being assembled every 3 hours, Galland's resistance crumbled. "Our problem is not merely one of numbers," he confided to an American intelligence officer who had cultivated a rapport with him. "It is one of manufacturing philosophy. German aircraft are built like handcrafted timepieces, complex, precise, difficult to maintain. Your planes are manufactured like automobiles, standardized, interchangeable, designed for mass production. We are fighting this war with the production methods of the last century." See, Galland proceeded to provide detailed assessments of the Messerschmitt Me-262 jet fighter program, including critical technical limitations and deployment challenges that would help Allied planners counter this emerging threat. This intelligence proved invaluable as Allied forces began encountering the revolutionary jet aircraft in the final months of the war. The scope of Gold Cup expanded dramatically in mid-1944 following the D-Day landings, as thousands of Wehrmacht officers swelled prisoner-of-war camps across the United States. By August 1944, more than 30 specialized Gold Cup teams were operating at POW facilities nationwide, coordinating strategic industrial exposures and gathering intelligence from the resulting psychological transformations. March 16, 1944. Willow Run Bomber Plant, Ypsilanti, Michigan. The cavernous interior of the Ford Motor Company's Willow Run facility stretched before Oberstleutnant Karl Kellner like a man-made canyon of steel, glass, and ceaseless activity. A decorated panzer commander captured during the Allied invasion of Sicily, Kellner had maintained rigid military bearing throughout his 9 months of captivity. But as he stood on the observation platform overlooking the mile-long B-24 Liberator production line, the facade of professional detachment visibly cracked. Below him, over 42,000 workers, many of them women, swarmed across the 93 acres of factory floor in a precisely choreographed industrial ballet. Massive sub-assemblies of wings, fuselages, and tail sections moved along parallel assembly tracks, converging with clockwork precision. Every 63 minutes, almost exactly 1 hour, a complete 4-engine heavy bomber emerged from the far end of the building, fully armed and ready for flight testing. Unmöglich, Kellner whispered. Impossible. Captain Robert Hayes, the military intelligence officer assigned as Kellner's escort, maintained deliberate silence. The Willow Run plant needed no narration, no propaganda enhancement. Its raw statistics spoke with industrial eloquence. 1.5 million square feet of production space, producing a new bomber every working hour, 24 hours per day, 7 days per week. How many plants like this exist in America? Kellner finally asked, his voice barely audible above the mechanical symphony below. Willow Run is our largest single facility for B-24 production, Hayes replied matter-of-factly, following the carefully calibrated script developed by Gold Cup psychological operations experts. But we have 6 other plants producing the same aircraft model at slightly lower volumes. Kellner's shoulders visibly slumped, a physical manifestation of the psychological capitulation that Gold Cup operatives had been trained to recognize and report. It was the moment when the mathematical reality of America's production advantage transcended abstract knowledge and became visceral understanding. That evening, in a monitored conversation with fellow German officers at the Fort Custer POW facility, Kellner made a statement that Gold Cup analysts would flag as particularly significant. We have been measuring this conflict in tactical victories and defeats, counting individual tanks, aircraft, and artillery pieces destroyed. But the Americans measure production not in individual units, but in units per hour. While we celebrate the destruction of 10 tanks, they have manufactured 100 new ones. It is not a war of armies, but of economies, and ours is a pebble against a mountain. The revelation experienced by Kellner and hundreds of other German officers exposed to American industrial might through Operation Gold Cup represented more than an intelligence victory. It marked a fundamental transformation in how these military leaders, many of whom would play crucial roles in post-war Germany, understood the nature of modern warfare and America's position in the global order. This transformation was precisely what Major General Clayton Bissell had envisioned when conceptualizing Gold Cup in early 1943. Our objective, he wrote in the program's founding directive, extends beyond immediate intelligence gathering. We are shaping the post-war perceptions of a generation of German military leaders. The officers who witness American industrial capacity firsthand will never again believe that Germany can successfully challenge the United States militarily. This understanding will prove as valuable for the peace that follows as any intelligence we extract for the war itself. The strategic genius of Gold Cup lay in its fundamental insight that seeing was more powerful than being told. German military doctrine had long acknowledged America's theoretical production capacity, but theoretical knowledge proved no match for direct observation. The visceral experience of standing beside an assembly line, producing a new tank every 30 minutes, accomplished what no intelligence briefing or propaganda broadcast could achieve. It rewrote the observer's understanding of what was possible. This insight was captured in a 1944 assessment by Dr. Henry Murray, the Harvard psychologist who helped develop the psychological profiling techniques used in GOLDCUP. The human mind can dismiss reported statistics as exaggeration or propaganda. It cannot so easily dismiss what it has personally witnessed. When a prisoner who has been fighting for years to destroy American bombers stands inside a factory producing those same bombers at a rate of 1 per hour, his mental model of the war collapses and must be reconstructed on new terms. The most productive GOLDCUP exposures were carefully calibrated to match the prisoner's professional background. Luftwaffe officers were shown aircraft production. Kriegsmarine officers toured shipyards. Panzer commanders visited tank factories. This targeting ensured that prisoners could fully comprehend the technical significance of what they were witnessing. For Kapitän zur See Hans Jedermann, former commander of the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen, the breaking point came during a controlled exposure to the Bethlehem Steel shipyards at Quincy, Massachusetts, in August 1944. As he watched 5 Liberty ships under simultaneous construction, each being completed in an average of 42 days, compared to the 6 to 8 months required for comparable German vessels, Jedermann reportedly turned to his escort and asked a question that perfectly encapsulated the GOLDCUP experience. Why did no one tell us? The question was rhetorical, but the answer was revealing. German officers had been told about American production capacity through intelligence briefings and reports. Many had dismissed these figures as Allied propaganda. GOLDCUP demonstrated that direct exposure could overcome this skepticism in ways that no briefing could achieve. Colonel Burton C. Andrus, overseeing the program from Fort Hunt, developed increasingly sophisticated methods for maximizing the psychological impact of these industrial exposures. Initial GOLDCUP operations in 1943 had focused on the sheer scale of American production. By 1944, the program had evolved to emphasize how America's manufacturing advantages were structural rather than temporary, rooted in geography, industrial philosophy, and civilian technical education. The most effective exposures, Andrus wrote in an October 1944 assessment, are those that help prisoners understand not just what America produces, but why we can produce it in such quantities. When a German officer comprehends that our advantages are permanent rather than circumstantial, his strategic calculations change permanently as well. This evolution in approach was demonstrated during an August 1944 GOLDCUP operation involving General Major Fritz Krauss, a logistics specialist captured in Normandy. Rather than simply touring production facilities, Krauss was strategically exposed to the entire supply chain supporting American manufacturing, from raw material extraction to component fabrication to final assembly. The Americans have created not just factories but systems, Krauss observed in a monitored conversation. While Germany struggles to transport coal 30 kilometers because of bombing, the Americans move raw materials across an entire continent without interruption. Their rivers, railways, and highways form a network that makes their entire nation function as a single integrated factory. How does one bomb a factory the size of a continent? This systemic understanding of American industrial advantage proved particularly valuable for intelligence purposes. As GOLDCUP prisoners grasped the structural nature of America's production capabilities, they provided increasingly sophisticated assessments of Germany's vulnerabilities. These insights helped shape the strategic bombing campaign, identifying critical bottlenecks in German manufacturing and transportation networks that could be targeted for maximum effect. Oberstleutnant Werner Baumbach, a decorated bomber pilot exposed to the Douglas aircraft plant in Long Beach, California, provided a particularly valuable intelligence dividend after his Gold Cup experience. Having witnessed American mass production techniques firsthand, Baumbach identified critical weaknesses in Germany's aircraft manufacturing system that Allied bombing planners had overlooked. "You are bombing our final assembly plants, which we can disperse and rebuild," Baumbach told his interrogators. "You should target the specialized component manufacturers instead, the 5 factories making precision bearings, the 3 plants producing hydraulic systems. These are our choke points. Without them, all aircraft production stops, regardless of how many assembly plants remain operational." This intelligence led to a significant refinement of the Allied bombing strategy in late 1944, targeting precisely the specialized component manufacturers Baumbach had identified. The resulting disruption to German aircraft production proved more effective than previous bombing campaigns against final assembly plants. By autumn 1944, Operation Gold Cup had evolved beyond its original conception as an intelligence-gathering tool. As thousands of German officers experienced the revelation moment of American industrial superiority, Gold Cup administrators recognized an unprecedented opportunity to shape post-war reconstruction. German officers who understood the structural advantages of American manufacturing methods could become advocates for similar approaches in a rebuilt Germany. This forward-looking dimension was formalized in October 1944, when the Gold Cup program was expanded to include educational components. German officers who showed particular interest in American manufacturing techniques were offered opportunities to study industrial management, quality control systems, and mass production methods, ostensibly to improve their technical understanding for intelligence purposes, but with the unspoken objective of preparing them for leadership roles in post-war German industry. The psychological transformation experienced by Gold Cup participants often extended beyond military and industrial reassessment to encompass political reevaluation as well. Many German officers, confronting the reality of American productive capacity, began questioning the fundamental premises of National Socialist ideology that had depicted the United States as a racially mixed, culturally decadent society incapable of disciplined industrial achievement. Oberst Friedrich Werner von der Schulenburg, a cavalry officer from an aristocratic Prussian family who had initially maintained rigid ideological discipline in captivity, experienced a particularly dramatic transformation after touring automobile plants in Michigan. In monitored conversations with fellow prisoners, Schulenburg directly challenged Nazi racial theories. "I have seen factories where women, Negroes, and immigrants of every nationality work side by side, producing more war material than Germany's most disciplined workers. Whatever one thinks of American social practices, their industrial results cannot be denied. Their system works in ways ours does not." Such ideological reassessments proved particularly valuable as American intelligence began planning for post-war occupation and reconstruction. Officers who had experienced Gold Cup exposures were flagged in prisoner databases as potential candidates for administrative positions in occupied Germany. Individuals whose first-hand understanding of American industrial capability might make them effective intermediaries in rebuilding German industry along more productive lines. By December 1944, as the Battle of the Bulge represented Germany's last major offensive operation of the war, Operation Gold Cup shifted focus from intelligence gathering to post-war planning. The program's psychological insights, how direct exposure to American industrial might could transform German military thinking, were incorporated into occupation planning and denazification strategies. The impact of Gold Cup extended far beyond the immediate intelligence gains. significant though these were. The program had demonstrated that seeing was not merely believing, it was understanding in a way that transformed the observer's entire mental model of what was possible. For hundreds of German officers who would later play key roles in rebuilding their nation, that transformation would help shape the economic miracle of post-war Germany. October 12, 1944. Willow Run Bomber Plant, Ypsilanti, Michigan. General Major Erwin Menne stood motionless at the end of the mile-long assembly line. As the officer responsible for panzer production allocation on the German General Staff, he had spent years studying industrial output statistics and production bottlenecks. Nothing in those studies had prepared him for what he had just witnessed. 63 minutes, he murmured, checking his wristwatch against the massive factory clock. Exactly as you said. Before him, factory workers guided a fully assembled B-24 Liberator bomber toward the airfield doors. Behind it, another aircraft was already approaching completion, with dozens more in various stages of assembly stretching back along the production line until they disappeared from view. Major William Thornton, his military intelligence escort, maintained deliberate silence. The Gold Cup protocol dictated allowing prisoners to process what they were seeing without commentary or propaganda. Reality needed no embellishment. "One bomber every hour," Menne finally said, his professional composure cracking. "Do you understand what this means? The entire monthly production of aircraft in Germany could be replaced by this single factory in less than 2 weeks." That evening, in his quarters at Fort Custer, Menne requested a meeting with his interrogation officer. Breaking with 9 months of limited cooperation, he provided detailed information about German production methods, industrial dispersal efforts, and critical manufacturing bottlenecks. Most valuably, he identified specific plants producing precision bearings for aircraft and tank production, facilities that Allied bombing planners had previously overlooked. When asked about his change in attitude, Menne's response was recorded verbatim. "Before today, I believed Germany might achieve a negotiated peace. Now I know such hope is fantasy. The war is lost, not because of any battle, but because of mathematics. Each factory I've seen produces more in a day than its German counterpart does in a month. Prolonging this conflict serves no purpose but to destroy what remains of my country." This transformation from resistance to cooperation typified Operation GOLDCUP's success. By December 1944, more than 700 high-ranking German officers had experienced similar revelations through strategic exposure to American industrial might. Their subsequent intelligence contributions provided unprecedented insight into German war production, technological developments, and strategic vulnerabilities. Beyond immediate intelligence gathering, GOLDCUP yielded unexpected dividends in psychological warfare. German officers who had witnessed American production firsthand often became unwitting vectors for spreading demoralization among their fellow prisoners. Monitored conversations in POW compounds revealed how GOLDCUP participants undermined others' faith in German victory through simple, factual descriptions of what they had seen. Oberst Werner Schröer, after touring aircraft factories in California, was recorded telling fellow Luftwaffe officers, "For every fighter we manage to produce, they build 20. For every pilot we train, they graduate 30. These are not propaganda numbers. I have seen the factories, the airfields, the training bases." Germany is not fighting a nation. It is fighting an industrial colossus against which traditional military metrics have no meaning. The impact of such testimony proved far more powerful than Allied propaganda broadcasts. German officers would discount Radio London claims about American production as exaggeration, but they could not so easily dismiss the first-hand accounts of respected comrades. By early 1945, Gold Cup had expanded beyond military production facilities to showcase other dimensions of American industrial capability. German officers were strategically exposed to agricultural operations in the Midwest, where mechanized farming methods produced food surpluses so vast that storage became a greater challenge than production. For officers from a nation facing severe food shortages, the psychological impact was profound. General Major Dietrich von Saucken, captured in France, described American agricultural abundance in a monitored conversation. "We have been fighting for Lebensraum, living space, to feed our people. Yet here, a nation with already abundant land has mechanized its farming to the point where a handful of civilians produce more food than an entire German province. The fundamental premise of our Eastern campaign is rendered obsolete by American tractors and combine harvesters." This observation highlighted another dimension of Gold Cup's psychological effectiveness. It challenged not just German assessments of the current war, but fundamental National Socialist ideological tenets. Officers who had embraced Nazi doctrine about territorial expansion as the path to national prosperity confronted an alternative model where technological innovation and mass production achieved greater abundance without conquest. As Allied forces pressed deeper into Germany in 1945, Gold Cup participants provided critical intelligence that saved both American and German lives. Their detailed knowledge of defensive installations, troop deployments, and strategic objectives, offered with the understanding that Germany's defeat was inevitable, helped Allied commanders identify paths of least resistance and avoid unnecessary urban battles. Major General Gunther Blumentritt, after touring Detroit automobile plants converted to tank production, provided detailed information about German defensive preparations along the Rhine. "The mathematical reality cannot be escaped," he told his interrogators. "You produce more tanks each week than Germany has operational on the entire Western Front. Further resistance will only result in needless German deaths and the complete destruction of our homeland. I provide this information not as a traitor to Germany, but as a patriot who understands the true balance of power." The most enduring impact of Operation Gold Cup emerged in the post-war Reconstruction period. As Germany rebuilt under Allied occupation, former Gold Cup participants played crucial roles in transforming German industry along American models. Their first-hand exposure to mass production techniques, quality control systems, and management methods provided a blueprint for the Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle of post-war German recovery. Dr. Ludwig Erhard, who would later become West Germany's Minister of Economics and Chancellor, studied Gold Cup reports while developing reconstruction strategies. "The prisoners who witnessed American industry firsthand," Erhard later wrote, "returned with more than intelligence about production numbers. They brought back a fundamentally different conception of industrial organization, one that emphasized standardization, efficiency, and mass consumption rather than craft production for limited markets." This transfer of industrial philosophy represented Gold Cup's most significant long-term success. German officers who had experienced the revelation of American production capability became post-war advocates for adopting similar methods. Companies like Volkswagen, BMW, and Siemens incorporated American mass production techniques under the guidance of executives and engineers whose understanding of these methods had been shaped by wartime Gold Cup exposures. The most poignant testament to Gold Cup's impact came from Kapitän zur See Peter Kremer, a U-boat commander who had sunk 25 Allied ships before his capture in 1943. After touring Newport News shipbuilding in Virginia, where he witnessed Liberty ships being completed in less than 50 days, Kremer experienced a profound revelation about the nature of modern warfare. In his post-war memoir, Kremer wrote, "Standing in that American shipyard, watching them build vessels faster than we could sink them, I understood that courage, skill, and tactical brilliance all the traditional martial virtues, had been rendered obsolete by industrial capacity. The age of the warrior hero had ended. The age of the production engineer had begun. Germany lost not because its soldiers lacked bravery or its commanders lacked brilliance, but because its factories could not match the production lines I witnessed in America. This recognition that industrial might had superseded traditional military prowess as the determining factor in modern warfare represented the core insight that Operation GOLDCUP sought to instill in its participants. It was an understanding that would shape German strategic thinking throughout the Cold War, as West Germany rebuilt its military within NATO while carefully avoiding any illusion that it could independently challenge industrial superpowers. The full extent of GOLDCUP's influence remained classified until 1973, when declassified documents revealed how systematically American intelligence had exploited industrial exposure as a psychological operation. Many former German officers were surprised to learn that their accidental encounters with American production facilities had been carefully orchestrated components of a sophisticated intelligence program. Brigadier General Ernst Günther Bade, who had toured aluminum plants in Washington state as a GOLDCUP participant, reflected on the program's impact during a 1975 interview. They never needed to interrogate us in the traditional sense. They simply showed us their factories, their farms, their railways and highways. The questions answered themselves. How could Germany win against such productivity? The most effective propaganda is truth witnessed firsthand. The mathematics of industrial disparity that GOLDCUP participants witnessed remained staggering even decades after the war. In 1944, the United States produced more aviation fuel than the entire Axis combined, manufactured 8 times as many aircraft as Germany, and built almost 15 times as many motor vehicles. American shipyards launched 19 million tons of shipping, more than all other combatants combined. This productive advantage wasn't merely a matter of size or resources, though these factors were significant. It reflected fundamentally different approaches to industrial organization. German manufacturing emphasized engineering excellence, complex designs, and skilled craftsmanship. American industry prioritized standardization, interchangeability, and production volume. GOLDCUP participants witnessed not just more factories, but a different manufacturing philosophy, one optimized for mass production rather than technical perfection. Operation GOLDCUP's legacy extended beyond military intelligence and industrial transfer to shape diplomatic and strategic relationships in the post-war world. German military and industrial leaders who had personally witnessed America's productive capacity became realistic advocates for partnership rather than competition with the United States. Their influence helped anchor West Germany firmly in the Western alliance system despite repeated Soviet diplomatic overtures. For the intelligence officers who designed and implemented GOLDCUP, the program represented a revolution in psychological operations, one that leveraged observable reality rather than propaganda messaging to transform enemy perceptions. As Colonel Burton C. Andrus observed in his final report on the program, "We discovered that no argument is as persuasive as witnessing a bomber completed every hour. No propaganda as effective as seeing 500 tanks on a single assembly line. The prisoners convinced themselves of American invincibility more thoroughly than any interrogator could have accomplished." In the decades following World War II, the insights from Operation GOLDCUP influenced American psychological operations worldwide. The fundamental principle, that direct exposure to American capabilities was more persuasive than any verbal claim about those capabilities, shaped exchange programs, diplomatic visits, and intelligence operations throughout the Cold War. Today, historians recognize Operation GOLDCUP as one of the most successful and cost-effective intelligence programs of World War II. By leveraging America's existing industrial might As a psychological weapon, the program extracted crucial intelligence, helped shape post-war reconstruction, and established realistic German assessments of American power that would endure for generations. The German officers who experienced those moments of revelation on factory floors across America, watching bombers roll off assembly lines every hour, or seeing endless trainloads of tanks emerging from single plants, carried that understanding back to Germany after the war. Their transformed perspective helped build a post-war international order based on realistic assessments of industrial capability rather than military bravado. In his final assessment of Operation GOLDCUP, Major General Clayton Bissell captured the program's enduring significance. "We have accomplished something unprecedented in military history. Rather than merely defeating an enemy in battle, we have transformed their understanding of what is possible. The German officers who witnessed our industrial might will never again believe their nation can successfully challenge America militarily. This understanding will prevent future wars more effectively than any treaty or alliance." For the German prisoners who experienced those revelations of American productive capacity, the war ended not with a battlefield surrender, but with a mathematical certainty witnessed on assembly lines from Detroit to San Diego. As one anonymous German officer wrote in his diary after touring the Willow Run bomber plant, "Today I saw why Germany lost the war. It was not decided on any battlefield, but on factory floors like this one."